On this episode is still loading.
I realized the moment I fell into the fissure that the book would not be destroyed as I had planned.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of the Still Loading podcast. I'm your host, Josh Koval, and today on the show, it kicks off an impromptu mini-series. I mentioned in my end-of-the-year retrospective, which actually at the time we're recording this has not even released to the public, but I mentioned in the end-of-the-year retrospective that I wanted to do more series. Well, if you follow me on social media, you'll know there is a big Mario month, not Mario month, Mario Mania is coming in just a few weeks, but leading up to that, I wanted to do a little unofficial impromptu series on the first two games in the Myst series, Myst and Riven. So today, obviously, you can tell by the title, we are talking about Myst, and next week you can look forward to an episode on Riven. But joining me today to talk about Myst. I was about to say it was Cyan's first game, but it was not. They actually developed a couple games before this, but this was their first huge runaway hit. But joining me to discuss this runaway hit is Doug from the Nostalgium Arcanum podcast. Doug, how are you doing today?
Hey man, I'm doing great. I'm really excited to be here to talk about clicking through some pretty deserted islands.
Some very eerie spaces that seem definitely more full than what the game shows you for sure. This game creeped me out as a kid, man. It really. I'll save it. I have a lot to say about my personal experiences with this, but yeah, we are here to talk about Myst. So as we always do to kick off these episodes, Doug, I want to throw it over to you. What are your personal experiences with Myst? How did you first discover the game? What are your memories surrounding it? Let my listeners know.
Sure. So I was 13 when this came out, and this was right at the dawn of like the ascendancy of CD ROM drives in the 90s. And it was basically driven by this game and The Seventh Guest, which is another puzzle exploration game, although not nearly as sophisticated in terms of design as Myst is. And this ended up just dominating the conversation. If you were keyed into video games at all, in the early 90s, you heard of Myst. Even people that didn't play games heard of Myst. So it was just around. And I had a friend who I had the PC, and they were a Mac family, and Myst debuted on Mac, and they were like early adopters. So they always had like the fastest, most powerful Mac you could find. They had it. And so I remember just going over to his house, and it was like, I got to show you this thing. And that was my primary memory of playing Myst, was mostly playing it at a friend's house. For whatever reason, I didn't go out and buy it on PC, even though it came out for PC shortly after, once it became the monster hit that it was.
Yeah.
So I didn't actually get around to playing Myst in its entirety till later. Like I played some of it. I ended up playing a lot of Riven, the sequel, at his house again. And then the first Myst title that I actually owned myself and played to completion was Myst 3. But
okay.
But I obviously I maintained a soft spot for this. I certainly played my share of it, even though I didn't own it. And it has clearly stood the test of time. I mean, it's been re-released over and over again, giving it different facelifts and stuff to sort of give it a little more vibrancy compared to the old original thing. But the core gameplay remains, this solid, as you said, eerie space to explore that is, awesomely accessible to everybody, right? There's no platforming, there's no challenge in terms of that. It's just you and your mind as you explore this space. So yeah, just strong, fond memories of this and kind of the its mastery of tone.
And that was something that was really intentional by the game developers. What you mentioned about how like there's no real way to die, there's no enemies coming to get you, there's not really any like the only thing that essentially gives you a fail status in the game is you quitting it. Like that's it. Like nothing can come and get you, nothing can kill you. And that was really intentional by the developers, Rand and Robin Miller, who founded, Cyan Worlds. They're the ones who made this game. And I think that's a really important thing to bring up really early on. Is I think that's one of the main reasons this game, like you said, Doug, contributed to being so popular with non-gamers. Like it was such a like people all over the place played this game, people who had no interest in games. And I think that accessibility of not having um the panic mode almost of like what platformers do, or other types of games where there's enemies or time limits or this and that, it really made it a lot more palatable to other people. Doesn't mean it's an easy game. Some of these puzzles, dude, are bullshit. So
No, I mean it is notoriously difficult and obtuse. But like you think of its closest cousins at this time would have been point and click adventure games. But
Mhm.
point and click adventure games of this era, think something like Secret of Monkey Island, are constantly talking at you. Like they are like joke a minute delivery machines,
Mhm.
right? Because that the way those games work is like, you're constantly going to be making mistakes. So to make up for the lack of progress, they go, well, we got to make all of the mistakes funny. So at least we're making
Mm.
you laugh as you're banging your head against King's Quest or whatever it might be. And here, the minimalist philosophy of this, like, we're not even going to give you that. We're just, like you said, it's like there's barely any music. It's mostly just this eerie silence and absence of stuff that makes this go, and leaves just like it says, yeah, it's and you're on your own to solve all these puzzles, especially when you couldn't just look up all the solutions on the internet as easily as you could now.
That Prima strategy guide, I'm sure, was a hot ticket back in the '90s, man, for this game. Yeah, no, I guess before I continue on, my own personal experiences with this, because otherwise I was about to launch into some other stuff that I wanted to bring up that you made me think of. But real quick, my own personal experiences with this. Growing up, I'm a little bit younger than you. I had my uncle did have this game, and I would watch him play it, and I remember it was just so. I was mesmerized by it. Like the game creeped me out. I always thought I was going to like run into somebody, and I did end up playing Riven as well on his computer. We played it on a PC, and I was about to share a Riven story, but I'll save that for the Riven episode. But I just remember being completely captivated by the world that was in front of me. It felt so real and vivid to myself when, I mean, I forget how old I was. I'm going to guess, because Riven came out in what, 97. So I was probably 6 or 7 when I first played this game. And I just remember the whole world just captivated my imagination. I was so confused by what was happening, but in the library, when you click on the painting to then, this is not a huge spoiler, but just in case, mild spoilers for those who haven't played it. When you click on the painting to unveil this hidden passageway to the back of the library, it blew my mind. I could not believe like what I was seeing. It really like, it hit me in just the right spot. It made me so curious about the rest of the world. And I remember being so obsessed with it that we had a Macintosh at home. My uncle had a PC, and we did eventually get this game for our personal home computer, our personal Mac. And I remember bringing the game into my computer school lab and somehow convincing my teacher to allowing me to install the game on a computer in the computer lab, which I think about it now, like how much like, security and other stuff like that. There is absolutely no way a school would allow that now, not even in the slightest. But, we back in the 90s, we just had these iMac computer labs, and we would play. And I remember bringing Myst in, and showing it off to the kids there, being like, look at these graphics, because like still, even at the time, like even in the late 90s, like graphics didn't look like that. Granted, it wasn't technically a full 3D world, it was a bunch of static 3D generated images, but still it looked better than anything we had ever seen at that time, at least to
Oh
us.
yeah. Yeah, I went back to it recently. We did do an episode of our show on Myst about a year ago now, and I went back to play some of it, and I was playing one of the more updated versions. I got to go look at some screenshots of the original, and I was just stunned of like, wait, in my head, it was the most lush, incredible 3D
Yeah.
environment I had ever seen, and now I'm like, oh, this is some reboot looking 3D. But at the time, again, mind blowing. And to me, it still doesn't matter in terms of that, because that's not what the game is about. Like, what its strengths, it still is sort of pretty and evocative, even in its simplest form. But
Mm-hmm.
it is so much about the feeling you get while you play it.
And I think that vibe is something that is so hard for games to master, or games to obtain. Like, there are certain games and series where when you play them, they evoke a feeling that is so hard to quantify. And I can't tell you why I'm able to feel it in some games and not in others. So for example, I'm speaking purely in terms of aesthetics, not necessarily in terms of quality of gameplay. Your mileage may vary depending on what you like, but like the Sonic games, like the original 2D Sonic games, I felt like had a very clear aesthetic with like their visual style and the music. It all felt like kind of bigger than the sum of its parts when you play it. You may not like the games, but I'm just talking once again purely about aesthetics. And it was the same thing for me with Myst, where you have these 3D rendered worlds with these eerie background, with this like ambient eerie music. And for some reason, even though I know without a shadow of a doubt there are no enemies in this game, you cannot get killed and you cannot kill anyone, I still feel like playing this game when you walk around a corner, there's going to be some motherfucker there just ready to pounce, because the game builds that atmosphere so perfectly and kind of sets this vibe that I don't know how other games, I don't know how games can do it so well. Like I don't know what it is specifically that really lends that to it. But for me, it will always, I think that's why this game has loomed large in my memory for so long. And I never beat it as a kid, but I finally did beat it in preparation for this episode. I beat it on stream a couple months ago. Actually, you reached out to me asking me what my thoughts were on it. So I'm happy to have you on to finally I can put this game on my backlog to rest. Myst is being covered. It has been beaten.
You talked about this tone stuff, and I was thinking about it before we got on, of like, why does this game do this so well? How does it create so much tension? Because I feel the same way. It's like you walk through these spaces and you feel creeped out, like you're not supposed to be there. And even though you're literally in no danger, the only danger in the game is that you pick one of the three bad endings. How does it do that? And I think what it does is there's two things in tone that this game does that are just best in class. One is that when you wander around these lonely spaces, it feels like that feeling you would get if you were in somebody else's house. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not supposed to be there, nobody's home, and in theory everybody, the whole family's on vacation, but I'm wandering through someone else's house touching their stuff. And like it creates that feeling, right? Because all you're doing is archaeology in this game. You're flicking every switch you can find, you're opening every drawer, every anything you can find to click on, you're touching it to see what it does. And there is something about that feels forbidden. The other thing it does really well is that, like you said, when you open the back of the library and all of a sudden there's a whole thing back there, it's that moment of like stepping through the wardrobe to Narnia over and over again.
Yep.
Like, that's what it feels like every time you find a book that links to a new age. Every time you open, like you said, a door, a passage that goes somewhere, you're immediately tantalized with like, I wonder what's behind that thing. I'm going to be treated to something interesting, because like this thing just is a mystery. All of it is mysterious, and that's enough to pull you forward. It's really impressive.
Mysterious, huh? Sorry.
I'm assuming that is deliberate, that they did
I would
call it
assume so as
Myst for that
well.
reason. Yeah.
Well, you brought up a couple things that is a pretty good transition to some of the fun facts about this. So one of the ones you're talking about is like, as you like the gameplay itself of the point and click nature of it, exploring around on the screen and exploring, different drawers and opening things up. And it like you said, I think that way you described it, if you're in a friend's house by yourself and you kind of shouldn't be there, but at the same time, it's not bad that you're there. I think that really describes the game well. And in development, I was watching the what is it? Oh shoot, who did it? It's the War Stories series that you can find on YouTube from like Ars Technica. There we go. From Ars Technica, they did an interview with Rand Miller, one of the co-creators of Myst, and he said how the part of the puzzle of the game wasn't just solving the puzzles the game presented to you. The interface itself was almost a puzzle. Like you were exploring the game world just as much as you were exploring the interface, which I thought was an interesting way to describe the gameplay. I do think exploring the interface can lead to some tedious moments of just pixel hunting, as we'll get to in some other when we talk about the gameplay in specific moments. But I kind of admired the attempt that they were trying to do to allow more immersion by having the gameplay of just navigating the UI be just as much of an exploration as the game world itself. I don't know if it quite nails it, but I'm at least I at least admire the attempt. And the other thing it made me think of was the whole Portal to Narnia thing. That was a very, very specific influence. One of the things in the post-mortem that Robin Miller did at GDC in 2013 is he talked about a lot of the different influences. One of them specifically was Narnia. Magician's Nephew is what he listed specifically. Have you ever read Magician's Nephew by any chance?
I have not. I believe I crapped out of the Narnia series somewhere on book 5. I think I did not finish.
You still have read more than me. I read so Magician's Nephew is interesting because I think it's like the 6th book out of the 7th or something like
But
that.
I know it's the origin story for Narnia.
Yes,
Yeah.
So it takes place before The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and there's a moment in that book that even I read it for the first time. I want to say when I was in like my early 20s. Well past the age that the books are really kind of geared for. And it still had a really cool moment. It captured my imagination where I forget the names of all the characters. It's been a minute, but there's 2 children that end up in another world, as you see with all the Narnia books, but they end up basically in the world between worlds. And as far as the eye can see, there is nothing but little like oases, like little pools, like perfect circles of water. And when they dip their heads inside, they can literally see other worlds. Like these are all portals to other worlds. But it's this really interesting visual of just seeing like tons, like thousands of these pools of water that are just actual portals to other world. And so you can kind of see that idea here in Myst, where with the linking books, like the books are portals to other worlds, or as they call them, ages in the story, in the fiction of the game. Some other influences were Zork, which they got a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot of the ideas from, but it was influenced specifically in terms of the nonlinear gameplay. They also referenced old books at Mysterious Islands, like from like Jules Verne books and stuff like that. I guess you could kind of see that with all the the book themes of the game, the Myst book, the linking books, all that stuff. And probably the biggest influence was Dungeons and Dragons. Specifically in the GDC talk, Robin was talking about how him and Rand would watch their older brother, who he didn't name, play D&D with his friends, and they would talk about how when you have a good DM, how the world itself kind of opens up. It allows a lot more creativity. A DM will kind of react to what the players are doing and try to craft a world and narrative around the player experience, as opposed to forcing the players into some type of narrative that they pre-designed type of thing. And there was a moment where Rand crafted his own D&D campaign where it was just a single fortress. No one rolled any characters. There was no dice rolling to check out, for moves or anything like that. It was just everyone played as themselves, and Rand would describe the world that they see, and they would have to figure out a way out of the dungeon, out of this castle or tower or whatever it was. That specific D&D campaign was the inspiration, at least part of it was the inspiration for one of the ages, the mechanical age in Myst, which I thought was such a cool thing, where they used their D&D campaign from probably a decade prior as the grounds for one of the ages in this game. It's just I'm just really impressed with how much they drew from to make this game.
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about with that D&D campaign is like the perfect metaphor for what Myst is, because it's literally like, yeah, there are no dice rolls, right? There's no mechanics to this game. You talked about the UI has to be sort of intuited. There is barely a UI. Kind of the whole point of it is, it's just you and this island and all of the interactable objects in it. And you just explore it in this archaeological fashion. I think when we did our Myst episode, I described it as trying to figure out how to program an alien's VCR, because that's kind of what it is. You're interacting with all of these various devices, and the puzzle is trying to basically suss out how all of these different machines work. If there is a code that's required, you have to figure out, well, how do I find the code? The code, of course, is not on a piece of paper next to the machine that it goes to. It's going to be somewhere else. And you have to piece together all these threads. You're probably taking a lot of notes as you do this. And that is just the unique experience that even these things that they were checking as references, like Zork doesn't do that. Zork is a more traditional text adventure. This is so miraculously hands-off that there's just nothing else like it. Like I mentioned, The Seventh Guest. The Seventh Guest is worth mentioning because it's another 3D CD ROM puzzle adventure that was a major seller in 1993. But in The Seventh Guest, you walk into a room. It all takes place in this haunted house. You go into one of the rooms in the haunted house, and literally there's a chessboard sitting out on a table, and then you do the chess puzzle, and then you solve it, and that's it. Here, all of the puzzles are blended into the environment. They're woven into the story, and so it isn't like, here, I am presenting you with a puzzle, solve it. It's more like, I am presenting you with, these just inscrutable objects, and it's up to you to do the legwork and the detective work to figure out how to make this machine do what you need to do to make further progress, which is to say nothing of the entire meta puzzle that is the true puzzle that underlies the entire game, which we'll get to later.
What I think you bring up an excellent point, Doug, with the how the puzzles in this are they work with the story and the setting as opposed to being separate from them. Because like you were saying with the example from The Seventh Guest, I wouldn't say that puzzle necessarily works against the game, but it sure as hell doesn't work with it, Yeah,
that's what I mean. The puzzles are all fine. Some of them are challenging, some of them are not. I have a lot of stupid affection for that game. But it isn't revolutionary at all, other than on a technical level. But what is revolutionary about Myst is that, again, all of it is about exploration and deduction, rather than just saying, literally, here, I'm giving you a bunch of playing cards, flip them over in the right order, and that's it, right? All of this interconnection between the puzzles and the game world, that's what makes it come alive. You feel like you're in an actual space, really exploring it, as opposed to just sort of wandering through it and then things happen.
You nailed it, man. I think that's really what makes this game special. And one of the things in Robin's GDC talk is some of the objectives they had, or for their approach to puzzles, was that this is exactly directly from his slideshow. Most people don't like puzzles. A good puzzle doesn't feel like a puzzle. You want it to be familiar, but also non-arbitrary, and you have to solve it via observation and common sense. Now, common sense is a little bit more tricky because common sense, I'm not even saying this to be like pithy, but like common sense isn't common. What's common to one person is not going to be common to another. There are so many times I wish things that I now consider common sense I knew back when I was even in my early 20s to avoid some embarrassment. But it's, so that common sense idea can be a trap, and I do think sometimes it falls into that in this game, but by and large I think the puzzles are actually really good. There's a few that I think are bad, and in fact the one that most people cite, the bathysphere one with the sounds, uh even Robin Miller flat out said in the GDC talk, yeah, that's a bad puzzle. That was not a good choice on our part. But we'll get to that in just a moment. Some real quick history leading up to the release of Myst. So Robin and Rand Miller we've referenced them a whole bunch already. They are the co-creators of Myst and the founders of Cyan Worlds, the developer of Myst, or Cyan. The game came out originally on September 24th, 1993 for Mac OS, and was ported to a bunch of other places. Fun fact, the reason it got ported to home consoles a lot of times, it was ported by Sunsoft, because Sunsoft is the company that gave the funding to Cyan to make Myst. Originally, they had this idea for a game that was going to be called The Grey Summons, which they pitched to Activision, because up until this point, up until Myst, they had made 3 games prior. All of them were geared towards children. Their first game, specifically called The Manhole, actually had a lot of influence towards their later games, including Myst. When they first got into game design, Rand really tried to convince his brother Robin to join forces and create a game development company. Robin was a musician and an artist and knew a little bit about computers, but for the most part he was more of the musician and artist, and Rand could do some art, but he was more of a tech guy. And so he sent to his brother Robin a copy of the program Max HyperCard, and at the time they were living in separate states. Rand Miller was living in Texas and Robin was living up in Washington State. And he sent it over to him. He sent it from Texas to Washington. Robin installed HyperCard on his parents' computer down in the basement, and that's when they began kind of starting to work on games. And HyperCard, for those who don't know what it is, it's honestly there's a lot of games built around it. Think of it as like a stack of index cards, but on the index cards you have pressable buttons that can do different things. So when you click on it on the computer, then you can tell, like, when the player hits this button, do this. And a lot of times each individual screen that you would see in Myst is a separate card on the stack of HyperCard. So when you click the button to, or when you click on the screen to move forward, it's just swapping the card for the next card, and you see a different image, which is usually the next spot down the path. And
yeah, it's
theoretically,
like modern,
it could take them anywhere. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's modern equivalent. If people have never played around with HyperCard, would be basically Microsoft PowerPoint. Like it's not terribly dissimilar from something like that. Where, yeah, as you said, the game of Myst is basically an illusion built on these cards. Where, yeah, exactly, you click forward and it brings you to a card in the stack. If you flip a switch in the Myst environment, what it actually does is it doesn't. I mean, yes, the card will play a little movie, but now something has changed in the environment, right? In response to that switch being flipped. So what that means is now you're moving over to a completely different stack of cards, which is basically the entire game of Myst, except now that switch has been flipped, right? So it's sort of one of these things where the whole game is put together with like spit and glue and dental floss under the hood in a way that's like this program was never designed to do anything this elaborate. So it's kind of one of those like incredibly impressive technical feats when someone is like, look, I learned how to make an actual working computer within Minecraft, right? It's kind of the same thing where like they like just mastered this program to make it do something far beyond something it should have been able to do. I in terms of like memories of Myst, that same friend, I remember going over to his house, and we tried to make a game out of HyperCard. I think we managed to make 7 or 8 slides max before we realized, like, this is daunting. This is not going to happen.
It
So
takes a
yeah,
lot of tedious effort.
yeah, I'm sure they perfected this by the time they started making Riven. How to do this in a more smooth way. So when you play the original Myst, that is one of the technical marvels to be aware of, is realizing, like, oh, you don't see it in the final product, but what's happening, in the code is a miracle.
It really is. And so much so that they, like, the technical limitations of the time, they talk about it in both the Ars Technica video and also the GDC talk, where they had to develop this game for the lowest common denominator of PCs. Also, they had to develop it with it in mind of home console, because Sunsoft, the company that gave them the money for the game, didn't care about the home PCs or Macs. They only cared about consoles. That's where they thought all the money is. That's why I believe the Sega, at least on Sega Saturn, I don't know for the other systems, but Sega Saturn, that's why it has the Sunsoft logo, because they published it on there. But
Yeah, and I know I haven't personally played it, but I know from the episode we did, our guest was telling me that he had played this Sega Saturn console version, and that it
mhm.
was wretched because the Sega Saturn had a lot less oomph than PCs and Macs at the time, and also the screen resolution was lower, which meant that, like, a lot
Mm.
of these, like, you know parchment pages you have to read were far more pixelated, and that meant there were
Oh no.
which meant there were certain puzzles where, like, you might not even be able to easily read the thing you need to read to solve the puzzle within the game.
Oh no.
So,
Oh
and
no.
again, and you're doing it without a mouse, which is like, I guess if you're insane, you could push your way through this game to completion somehow. But yeah, just not this hardware was not equipped to run this game.
It's funny, the reason why Myst is broken up into different ages was due to the technical limitations of consoles, actually, because they knew they were going to have to port it over to a console. So a console was not going to be able to have the necessary memory in order to essentially store. I don't know if they mean in RAM or however the technical specifics of it were, but they couldn't just put everything, like, if they were to combine all the ages and everything onto one specific area, like where you could just click around and explore, it would not have been able to work on the consoles at the time. So they purposely split it up into those different ages to essentially allow for the console to load all the different spot things that it would need to. And what I was saying before with the lowest common denominator, even for PCs, they had to develop this for single speed CDRs, for CD ROM drives, which CD ROM drives already were expensive back in the 90s. Like, this game is credited with popularizing it, because as CD ROMs, became more in fashion, I guess, people was like, well, what can I do with it? And everyone in computer stores would be like, buy Myst. That's what it's for. And it really helped with the sales of this game, but we'll get to that in just a moment. And but they had to go to the lowest common denominator. They had to assume the people who were playing this couldn't afford the big fancy double, or let alone like triple speed CD-ROM drives, CD drives. So they had to actually be very painstakingly meticulous with where they place the data in the physical locations of the data on the CD. They so every age and every section is literally placed next to each other on the disc, so that way when you go to the next slide in the HyperCard stack, the CD doesn't have the disk drive doesn't have to move the laser far in order to get to it, if that makes sense. They were worried about, even with sounds, because sounds would have to be located on a different part of the drive. So how do you, like, they were saying, like, all right, well, it's going to have to, read a certain amount of the music, and if when it runs out of that, it's going to have to go back and read read that spot again. So something's going to freeze. So they had to place everything. So it makes it seem like just putting it on the disc was like a game of Tetris, trying to figure out the best possible solution to place the data on the disc, so that way it would have the least amount of impact on the player's experience in terms of load time, which I just can't even imagine having to think about that today.
I love this stuff. I really love these kinds of stories of like kind of triumph over technical limitations.
Mm-hmm.
And, think of a fictional one, or actually not even nonfiction one. Think of like, Apollo 13, right? Those scenes of them like trying to jerry rig their spacecraft to, we're going to run out of air unless we make this thing work with that thing. I love these tales of ingenuity. Because this makes you appreciate the game that much more, because none of that, you never notice it when you play the game. The game is seamless and like perfectly fine tuned. Like I don't think I've ever seen Myst, throw out an error code, right? You can't soft lock yourself in any way in this game. Like everything in it is perfect, and it had to be, or it wouldn't work. And the way they put this thing together to make it do that, as you said, right? This was a killer app for the CD ROM. This one and the Seventh Guest were the things that when you went into a store, it was like there were just tons of these on the shelves, both of those games, as a way of saying like you have to get a CD ROM drive because you have to experience what these things can do. And it was the beginning of, for me at least, opening up this possibility space of like, oh wow, games can really be and do anything. Before that, you have, I loved, the NES, I love the SNES, and some of the like old PC games at the time, but Myst was so original, unique, and also even for its primitive nature, like the 3D imagery of it, this like lush kind of ambient music, it signaled like the beginning of like where we're at today, where it's like, yeah, look at God of War Ragnarok or whatever we want to put on screen, we can fucking put on screen, whatever, no big deal. But Myst is kind of like the beginning of that era of going like, yeah, we can do this stuff. We can let our imaginations run wild, and we have the technology that will let us do it, even if it was in its like most primitive form here.
And I think one of the other things that really advanced at the time was also storytelling, besides just a technical aspect. I know, I believe your guest on your episode, Cole from Watch Out for Fireballs, talks about this as well, is just what this game does is that it tells the majority of its story is told through the environment. And there is a story at its core, and we'll get to the story, like we'll do an overview with us behind a spoiler wall, but it's still, though, the way this game tells its story is that it starts off really simple with just a note on the ground, then it kind of directs you where to go. The basic premise, without spoiling all the plot twists and everything, is you are this person who discovers this book called Myst, and when you place your hand inside, you see it's a moving image inside the book, but as you read through it and then you find this image, you place your hand on it and you fall into the world of Myst, like literally get sucked in, and you don't know where you're at. You find a note from this guy named Atris talking about he has a message for his wife Catherine, and basically that's all you're given. So he tells you where to find the message, and from there you kind of learn about the world of Myst, who is like where Atris is, what has happened to the world, and you kind of figure out who's at fault and who's not. And that's all I'm going to say in terms of the plot until we get to the spoiler wall. But the way they tell the rest of it is there are journals that Atris has written about the different ages that you explore, the different worlds you go to, and you get a real sense of the world. Like they really did a good job of building the like in your imagination what the world is. So when you travel to those ages, you can see what he wrote about, and you can also see a sense of I should at least bring up this. He has two sons. Oh my gosh.
Cirrus and Achenar.
Thank you. Cirrus and Achenar. And you can kind of see little bits about them. Like the crux of the drama in the game is that you have to choose which brother to trust. But one, Cirrus, Achenar, or neither. And I'm not going to go into any further than that. That's what I'll leave before the spoiler wall. But as you explore the different worlds, you can see parts of each age with fingerprints from Cirrus and fingerprints from Achenar and stuff from Atris and all this other stuff. And it's really cool to, it kind of builds out these worlds, and it builds out both the characters that you can't really interact with directly, and you get a better sense of them through seeing parts of each age that kind of belong to them and what they had their hands on. And that was super intentional. They talk about it in the GDC thing, where how do you build characters where we don't have the technology really to have you interact with them? Because if we want this game to be nonlinear, you'll just be able to walk away from them, and that's not realistic. We can't have that. So they do this like one way thing with the brothers trapped in their books, and where if you walk away from someone kind of like on a TV screen, it doesn't feel nearly as like far-fetched as like you having a conversation with someone in person and then just yeeting off and be like, no, I'm not talking to you. And I thought that was a really interesting way to kind of fix that. I wouldn't have thought of that as a problem, but I think they were smart to consider it that, and I think it made the game that much more immersive. And also, as you mentioned before, Doug, add mystery to the world. But I mean, there's so many fun facts I could go into, but I think we should go into some of the gameplay with this, like the puzzles and all this other stuff. And I'll find other ways to work in some of the fun facts that I looked up. Like I have like 3 pages of notes, listeners. Like I can't believe how much I was able to find on this. So I'm not going to be able to get to all of this on the episode. But Doug, I want to throw it over to you, my friend. Some of the puzzles in this, like what are some puzzles that stand out to you? What are some of your favorite ages? Like just talk about your experiences playing through the puzzles and the ages.
Yeah. So maybe I'll set the table a little bit. Again, not too much with plot stuff, but basically, you as you mentioned, Cirrus and Akanar are Atreus' sons. They are each trapped within a book, and they are pleading with you to get them out. So your mission from them is go into each of these sub ages, that link off of the main hub that is Myst Island. And within each of these ages, he's hidden a red page for one and a blue page for the other. So basically 2 prime puzzles in each thing, which is somewhere, if I get through all of this stuff, I will find one of these pages and I can bring it back to the brother who's asking for it. And I will be able to better understand them and better get more sense of the story and get closer to releasing one of them as I understand what they're saying. Right. So every puzzle you do in this game is sort of in service of delving further, and the way they communicate this stuff is so great. So they give you, they'll give you an obvious interactable thing, right? A big set of gears, a switch, a panel with buttons on it. And so the second you see one of those, that obviously implies, okay, there is a pattern to these, and they do things, and I just have to figure out how to operate them. So maybe there's a code, right, that I have to enter. Well, if you see something with a code on it, that means the code must be somewhere in the environment. So I got to go explore somewhere else. Maybe there's a book, and if I read the book on one of the pages, oh, okay, there's the symbols that I recognize from that thing, right? That's how they sort of that's how they wordlessly kind of guide you by giving you the hint of like, if there's a lock, there must be a key, and if there's a key, there must be a lock. And by showing you keys and locks around, eventually you get enough of a sense of like, I've seen a bunch of these keys and I've seen a bunch of these locks, and now I can start figuring out how they interact, right? So I think my favorite of these is actually one of the first ones you do, because this is like, to me, the pattern for the puzzle solving deduction approach that you need for the rest of the game. And that is when you find the stars. You need the stars because there's an observatory, and you could put in like any date from like 0 to 9,999, right? A month, a date, and a year. And you have all of these stars, and you're like, well, I could literally enter anything into this panel. So there's going to have to be some sort of something else that I have to find that will break this code for me, and figure out, okay, well, I need to put in a specific set of dates and look for a specific constellation. And those constellations correspond to some panels that are out in front of the library, I believe is where they are. And so for me, like figuring out like, okay, there's a whole bunch of little moving pieces to this, and there's a bunch of stuff in the library to read through, and doing that, gets you to learn about the story. It gets you to learn. I mean, you could just flip through every book looking for star charts, but you're going to spend the time reading some of this stuff, absorbing some of the history of this world. But eventually it will lead you to that when you finally have that moment of like, oh, great, here's a date, and I can punch that into the machine, and it shows me a picture of a constellation, and I can go over and put that constellation on the panel, and eventually I believe that opens up the path to the stone ship age, if I'm not
Correct.
mistaken.
Yep.
Yeah, like just when you solve a puzzle like that, the dopamine rush of like, I'm the smartest man alive, like that you feel when that happens is like it's something you can really only get from a series like this. Like this is like, that is the thing Myst delivers to you the best out of anything it does. So that for me, that puzzle will always stick with me because it felt so daunting the first time I saw it, and then just by being observant and patient, like I figured it out. And yeah, that feeling of triumph is unequaled.
And I think that puzzle is a good example of like that, this type of game design of having to observe the environment around you and then being able to recall different things. I normally hate that type of puzzle. I do. I don't like puzzles that make you rely on like hoping that the player remembers something or hoping that they remember the correct thing. Now, to be fair, the game, and I actually have an original box. Shouldn't say an original. I have a PC copy for Windows 3.1 and 95. The game came with a journal, an official Myst journal for you, the player, to write down the note, like your notes, and it's a decent amount. Like they give you lots of paper to work through the puzzles, which I think is really cool. I also think they talk about it in some of the talks where that adds layers of immersion to you, where the game is now no longer just something on your computer or in your computer screen on your computer screen. It's now something that you have brought out into your real life, into the real world, because you are physically writing down parts of the game. And I can say when I was playing through Riven, I both Riven and Myst, I did that. I didn't damage my Myst journal that I got from a thrift store because that apparently was unused. It's still in pristine condition, so I kind of wanted to keep it that way because I got paper. I don't need the Myst journal. But anyway, but I think it does add a layer of immersion when you can bring the game outside of the screen into the real world. And with the puzzle you mentioned specifically, I think the reason it didn't bother me in Myst, I have some issues with how it's done in Riven, but at least here in Myst, the levels are small. It doesn't take a lot to walk around. So with the puzzle you referenced, Doug, with the stone chip age and the different constellations and the symbols, those puzzles are within to see everything that you need to see to put that together, it's within 2 or 3 clicks of each other. In the library, if you figure out the tower, which I'll spare the listeners, so that way if you want to play this, that way I don't spoil that puzzle for you. But if you figure out the tower in the library, that gives you the constellations, which then those constellations, you have to write down those symbols so that way you can go back to the book in the library, see what the symbols represent. And as you're traveling back and forth from the observatory to see the constellations to the library, you are almost guaranteed to see the boxes in the courtyard area with the different constellation symbols in them. So you can put 2 and 2 together, like right there. They are all right next to each other, but you still have to do the exploration. You have to explore around in the library to find the right books that you need. You have to figure out the puzzle inside the library to get to the tower. You have to go down the main pathway to see it, but it's all within a short distance from each other. It's not like you're in the stone chip age and you get something there and then you have to use that what you learned there in a different age. That type of thing would drive me nuts because I feel like that's a little bit too far of separation, where it's like, well, why would I need something from the stone chip age to figure out something in the channelwood age and vice versa, right? I think unless the game really makes it apparent or tells you specifically, like, hey, like you may find stuff in some ages that you need in others. Like even if they should build it in the story in like one of the journals, say like Atra says, I left things all across the different ages that link to each other or some shit like that, but they didn't, and they kept it all kind of bottlenecked into their own state, into their own ages. Everything you need to do to complete the stone chip age is in the stone chip age. Everything you needed to complete the channelwood age is in the channelwood age. Same with selenitic or selenitic.
Selenitic.
Stellanitic. There we go. Same with selenitic. Same with mechanical. Everything that you need is right there. And I think that is a really smart design choice. If you're going to make observation be the solution to puzzles, don't put a heavy burden on the players to remembering some random detail that they may not have even known that they needed to, that could take, 5 minutes to travel across, especially in a world that's filled with important details and nooks and crannies to explore. I think I remember when I was playing through this, I was just very impressed that it wasn't more obtuse. There are some bad puzzles, like we've said before, we'll get to, but it wasn't more obtuse. What do you think? Did you agree with me with that?
No, I totally. First of all, this game inspired it because of its success. A lot of Myst likes, right? A lot of developers tried to make their own version of Myst or something that used this template, and I'm sure that there were some that did exactly what you're talking about, where the bits and pieces of these puzzles are far flung across the game, and it's much harder to coalesce into the solutions. And I think it's one of those things where like the puzzles in Myst feel really hard, and then you solve them, and you kind of look back and you go, actually that was actually pretty kind and fair. They did give me everything I needed. It was all right there. I just had to put it together. As you said, there's a few that are tougher or involve a little too much. Like, I got to push this thing, and then I got to walk all the way back over here and click this thing, and then I got to go all the way back again to the other side. And like, there's a few of those, but they're in the minority. The vast majority of the puzzles are, pretty. They're more straightforward than they would appear at first, and they are giving you everything you need. It's on you to notice it.
What's one of your favorite ages to explore? Was it the Stone Ship age, or did you have like any other ages that you enjoyed kind of clicking around in?
I like the Channelwood age a lot. I think the setting is really
Yes.
evocative. It's sort of Endor, right? It's the sort of treetop city above this watery swamp. I just sort of I like that kind of environment. I think is more interesting than I think like something like the Mechanical Age is a little more dry, and so I really like that lush environment in Channelwood. And I think Channelwood does a lot to give you that environmental story you're talking about like who Cirrus and Akinar are, like, because ultimately everything kind of boils down to this family drama of Atris, Catherine, Cirrus, and Akinar. And you only get that from seeing what they left in their wake. And there's a lot of it in Channelwood. So I think that's to me, that was one of the best ages in terms of doing what they set out to do. So I always enjoyed that one. Do you have a favorite?
I actually am 100% with you on Channelwood. That was my favorite age as well. I think it's more the visuals that got me. I'm a sucker for like woods, and I think specifically with the Mechanical Age, not mechanical. I'm sorry, Stone Channelwood Age, is that it's kind of there's a little bit of whimsy to it. It's a little whimsical, where there's no ground, everything's flooded, so you're standing on just docks that are just traveling around this world, and then you have to go up into the trees via elevators. And the puzzles are trying to figure out how to turn the elevators on, but it's pretty straightforward nonetheless. And as you go up there, you can explore the treetops. And as a kid, I was always a sucker for like tree houses that connect to each other, like Swiss Family Robinson and shit. Like that type of stuff, I loved it, dude. I can't get enough of that type of thing. So I think even as an adult, that hasn't quite left me. I just really like woods and woodsy things. So Channelwood was by far my favorite. And in terms of puzzles, Channelwood was the easiest one, I feel like figuring out that puzzle with the water. I don't want to say anymore. There's only one puzzle I'm willing to spoil, and it's the one from the Selenitic Age.
Is that the bathysphere one?
Yep, the bathysphere one.
Yeah,
I hate that puzzle. We'll get to that in just pretty much next after I'm done talking about this. But I would say, I think my favorite puzzle is actually the tower in the library. Like, I like how that, like, once you figure out how that works, that is the linking puzzle that that gives you the clues on how to get to the 4 ages, to the Selenitic, to the stone ship, to the channelwood, and to the mechanical. Once you figure that out and you get those puzzles, I remember when I solved that, I went, oh, so this is how you were supposed to figure this out for all these years. Because I remember as a kid, I would just look it up in a strategy guide. I'd look up the 3 constellations you need. I would look up how to get to the mechanical age with the clock and all this other stuff. Like, I wouldn't figure any of it out. I would just use the strategy guide. Now as an adult, it helped a lot. Like, I think it clicked with me. I'm like, okay, I can see the design in this now. It's not arbitrary. It's very intentional. And so actually it's funny, like one of the things that when they were play testing this, they had to add that note from Atris to Catherine on the ground, because originally that wasn't in there and players had no idea where they were supposed to go, kind of justifiably so. You just drop a player into an island and just say, all right, figure out the puzzles. And it's like, well, I don't know where to start. Like, there's like 6 or 7 different start points, and most people don't want to waste their time just tinkering around figuring out which. So I think that note was a really smart choice. And the way they play tested it, actually, before they rendered all the different images that you saw, and to account for, play tested to account for errors like I mentioned, or some of the puzzles we're talking about, to test those out, they did it in a D&D session the way I described Rand's Fortress. They would have these D&D sessions where they would play through the game like it was like a D&D session, and I'm assuming Rand would be the dungeon master and describe what the players see, and they would keep all the puzzles but go through it as that session. And I thought that's a really like cheap and effective, I should say cheap, but cost effective way to play test your game without having to spend the amount of manpower and time, the sheer amount of time. Like, the renders in this game, because with the technology of the time, took 2 to 14 hours per image. Like, can you imagine?
Yeah, it's crazy to think how far we've come technologically from something like that, where think of what you're rendering in real time now, just on your phone, not even on, say, like, a PS5.
Yeah,
that stuff is just, it's wild. And and yet it still feels impressive when you see it again, because you know what went into it.
absolutely. 100% agreed. But yeah, so that my favorite puzzle is that the tower in the library. And conversely, my least favorite puzzle is everything in the Selenitic age. I actually like the visuals of it. I find that the most like eerie, but Channelwood's pretty eerie. Actually, no, Stone Ship is too. Anyway, they're all eerie except for Mechanical Age. I didn't find that one that creepy. But then they're all creepy. And I keep like going back on what I was going to say, because then I say it's not creepy, and then I think about something. I'm like, that really freaked me out. Anyway, in the Selenitic age, there's a puzzle with a bathysphere where you have to explore this maze in a bathysphere to get out of the Selenitic age. And dude, like, what the hell? What an the way
You're not looking to me to defend it, are you? I'm not.
No, I'm not. No, the way the Selenitic age is supposed to work, listeners, is that it's a lot of sound-based puzzles, which should have been my clue. I should have been able to figure out. I was a little annoyed where I'm like, I can see why I should have been able to figure out the puzzle, but I still think it's a bad puzzle. Where the whole age is filled, like the way you get to the age is by doing a sound puzzle with a piano. To solve the puzzle of that age, once again, it's all sound-based. You have to figure out how that works, and it's a little complicated, but it's not completely ridiculous once you figure it out. Once you figure out the first sound puzzle, then they have a second puzzle for you to exit the age. And to exit the age, you get into this bathysphere and you have to traverse a maze. And essentially, the bathysphere will move to an intersection that has 8 different options, the way you came from, and then 7 other new ones. And the way it's supposed to work is that when you get to that age, or when you get to that intersection, a sound will play. And that sound is supposed to indicate which direction you're supposed to go. If you hear one sound, it might mean that you have to go straight or go left. If it's, but it's all north, south, east, and west. So if you hear the north and east sound, like one after the other, that means you have to go northeast. So it's one of the diagonals. The way they try to teach you this puzzle is that the first few intersections, there's only one possible direction you can go. The rest literally are blocked off. It's not that you'll try to go that way and they stop you. It literally has like a wall showing, like indicating to you visually, you can't go this way. So the first 2 or 3 intersections, they play the same sound. I think the first 2 intersections or something, they play the same sound twice, and you can only go that direction. So it's supposed to teach you through those first 2 intersections how the puzzle's supposed to work. And then the third intersection, they play a different sound, and the only direction you can go is the direction that sound is linked to. So I understand how they were trying to teach you the puzzle, but the problem is that since it's a tiny arbitrary sound, it like you might not even be paying attention to it the first time you play it. So you'll do the first 2 intersections, and all of a sudden then you notice the sound's different, and then you might wonder, okay, why is the sound different? But have no idea that it's connected to the directions. I understand the attempt. I understand what they were trying to do, but man, like it really feels like the sounds are not like spotlighted enough in order to indicate this is super important. You need this. And I don't know. I hated this puzzle. If you have not played this game, just look up a strategy guide for this section. It's bullshit.
No argument for me. This is, this is a tough one. I think, if they had the problem with it is if they tutorialized it better, it would have just solved the entire puzzle for you.
Exactly.
Because then it's not a puzzle anymore. Now it's just a task where they just tell you when you hear this button, you go this way, right? Now it's not. So the puzzle is making the deduction. But as you said, by the time you've noticed that these sounds might be a clue, you're like in it. And so you're rudderless. You have no way to now, these buttons, the sounds now have no context for it. You just hear a beep or whatever, and you're like, I don't know. Does that mean left, right, straight? I don't know. There's no way to find out by experimenting anymore. So it sucks. There's no other way to describe it. Don't let that put you off the game. That it's one of a few puzzles that suck, but I think the overall their batting average remains very, very high.
Oh, 100%, man. Like almost all the puzzles I thought were like really good. I do think like even the first puzzle, there is a little bit of a layer of like, it's a little because they throw out terms that they throw out a lot of proper nouns in this game. And it's not as bad as like some other games where they try to build lore by putting a lot of proper nouns that you don't have the context to understand just yet. Like Final Fantasy 13 comes to mind. But with this, the first note that you get from Atris, it says, I've left a message for you in like the I forget what it calls it, but it's like a room right where you started on the docks. So right there it tells you, okay, there's a room on the docks that I might have missed when I spawned on the docks at the beginning of the game. And to read this message, it's the number of marker switches. And so you're like, okay, what the hell is a marker switch? I have no context for what that is. But if you go to the room, you can then see this like weird, almost looks like a cauldron. And when you turn around, you'll see like this I was going to say billboard. It's not a billboard, just a little, like, not a Post-it note, but a piece of paper pinned up on the wall. And on it, it gives you different numbers. And it says marker switch, I think is like 67 or something like that. And then there's like one other thing where it's like a topographical map of the island of Myst. And if you click on the button on there, then it opens up and you see an option in order to input numbers. So if you input the number 67, and then you go back to that cauldron and you click the button on the cauldron, which this is, I guess, part of the gameplay where you're supposed to experiment with what you can click on, because that button on the cauldron, while it does stand out, it doesn't necessarily look like a button. It looks like just some type of decoration for it. But when you click on it, then you'll see what the marker switch looks like, which if you've explored around, even just like the moment you get on the island, you see a marker switch right off the bat. Like you pass two of them two of them minimum just to get up to the node. So you can see them. So theoretically, then you can start counting the marker ships or the marker switches, and then you go back to that cauldron thing hidden on the dock, type in the number in on the behind the poster thing, and that's where you get the message. It's a really cool intro puzzle, but I did think where it's like, why would you bother using the markers? Why make it that hard? It's a weird puzzle to me because it's asking you to solve the first puzzle it's giving you by solving the first puzzle again, if that makes sense. It's like, it's to solve the first puzzle, you have to solve it a different way, which you already don't understand how to solve it the first time. I'm not doing a good job of explaining it. Does that make any sense?
No, there's some of these puzzles, it's almost like, they were like a Mad Magazine fold-in, right? Like it looks one way and you solve it a certain way, and then you realize, oh, if I turn it around and I do this backwards, I get a different thing, a piece of information to come out of it, right? So there are some of these things that you will have to work your way through twice from a different angle, essentially. And that, I believe that puzzle is one of them where like they want you to sort of have that experience of going like, oh, okay, there's like the thing it obviously does straight up, but it also has a second function that will reveal a clue of some kind. So there's sort of this like economy of puzzles there. But once they do it to you once, you'll at least, it's not that this applies to every puzzle in the game, but it's giving you this like language of like, this is one of the ways we craft puzzles in Myst, and you're on the lookout for it after that.
Yeah, I guess I guess it is a good teaching method for it. I don't know. I think I just didn't like that opening puzzle. Like I liked how it gave you direction, but it still just felt just a little bit too. But you know what? At the same time, by counting the marker switches, it forces the player to explore around the island. It forces the player to do exploration right off the bat.
Yeah, considering how limited their tool set is in terms of their ability to communicate ideas to you, they do a pretty good job of going like, well, we can't directly tell you to go look over here, but we can do things that kind of make this thing look enticing, or as you said, induce you to explore in the hopes that, just out of your own curiosity or desire to see more of the island's aesthetic beauty or whatever, you will wander into these places and again necessarily notice, oh, hey, I found another key or a lock. I wonder what this goes to.
All right, I want to move on now to our spoiler wall section, Doug. We've been talking a lot about the puzzles, and I mean, I still probably have so many more notes I could bring up, but we are running over an hour so far, so I want to get to our spoiler wall. We can talk about the story and the world and some of the stuff they go into. So, listeners, if you do not want this game spoiled, or any puzzles we may talk about, we can talk about puzzles a little bit more freely with this. Then go play the game. It's honestly worth it. It's not a long game. I highly recommend checking it out. But I will say though, the lore is a lot more interesting than the story. So you're not gonna, as much as I say, like, we're gonna put up a spoiler wall, I don't think the story itself is. I don't know. I'm torn on how much I like it. But anyway, we're gonna dive into the story now. So,
sure.
Yeah. I don't know where even to begin. Doug, what are your thoughts on the story? We'll start with that. What are your overall impressions of it?
So, as you kind of indicated, the story of Myst, there isn't really much of a quote unquote story in terms of incident within the game. It's 90% what you learn about the background lore that tells the story of the game. And, I guess now we can get into the details of what it's about, where basically it's sort of a King Lear idea. Wise King Atris is, he's one of this race of people called the Dunni, who are authors of these books. And it's not 100% clear if they write a book that is an act of creation that makes an age, like that Atris creates the Selenitic age by writing it into a book, or that the writing of the book just creates a portal to the pre-existing Selenitic age. But regardless, he is one of the last of these people. And he has his wife, Catherine, who we don't see in this game, and his sons, Cirrus and Achenar. And at the beginning of the game, we find out that all three of them have been imprisoned. Cirrus, Achenar, and Atris have all been imprisoned. That they basically, Cirrus and Achenar imprisoned their father, who was after them because they had been exploiting and running hog wild through these ages and ruining them. But Atris is clever enough to also end up with each of them trapped in the red and blue linking books. And so as you go through the game, when you first come across the red book, say, or the blue book, which contains one of the sons, and you open it, you see the little like postage stamp size FMV video of, say, Cirrus trying to talk to you, but there's so much static that you can barely make out anything. As you
bring me red pages.
It's about all you can. Yeah, it's like all you can get out of them is like blue pages. And so, but as you bring them red and blue pages, the message becomes clearer and you can hear them better. And each one of them is pleading you, basically saying, "Don't trust my brother. My brother's evil. Bring me the blue pages. No, bring me the red pages." And that is an incentive to go through all of the puzzles in each of the ages, because you want to get both the red one and the blue one to get a better sense of what they're talking about. And I really love this. I think
Agreed.
it's such a simple premise of like, okay, go solve puzzles to try and find out what these guys are about. And as you said, which one of them I should trust. Everything else is going through each of the ages and seeing like, I'm not seeing a lot of evidence I should trust either of them. Like Cirrus is the more like gentlemanly of the two, and Achenar is a little more of like the wild man. But like you go into like one of these ages and you'll find like a lamp that's made out of a human rib cage. Like that's the
yep.
So you're pretty we're pretty clear on Cirrus and Achenar both being pretty bad right off the bat. So yeah, I'll hand it over to you there. I mean, that's a lot of the story, but that's the major part of it.
Oh no, I mean that's pretty much exactly what you said. I think the fact that it kind of, one of the things that they wanted to do in this game was have an ethical or moral dilemma for the player, as well as some of the characters, and so that this is their version of that. This is the player's ethical dilemma. Who do you trust? Who is actually telling the truth? And at the end of the game, if you bring them all of their pages throughout the levels, there's still one more page that they need in order to be freed, and they're both in the same location. They tell you how to get it. It's a they tell you a specific book in the burned library to click on it, tell you which page number to go on, and use that puzzle in the fireplace in order to basically use it as an elevator, go downstairs, and you can see there are 2 pages, and there's also this green book, and both of them beg and plead with you, don't touch the green book, don't do it, just get my page, bring it back to me, my brother's a piece of shit, he killed our dad, I'm the good guy, don't listen to anyone but me, type of thing. And like you said, Doug, like they're both not, like, you really get, like, you don't even need to look at the world around you. You can just watch their videos, and they're both fucking crazy. It's really uncomfortable sometimes, just seeing all the, like you said, what is it? Cirrus is the more gentlemanly of the two, and he kind of gives off like some almost like dictator vibes, like he really, it feels, he just feels evil, like pure evil, versus Achenar is just certifiably insane with a hint of evil. I don't know. They're both not good. You're right. Ribcage lamps, and they probably caused genocide to some of the people in the Channelwood Age. I wouldn't be surprised. Like, there's a lot of heavy things hinted at in this game through the background story, but never explicitly stated or anything like that.
I'm not the biggest proponent of Myst 4. No one's going to say that's their favorite, but one of the cool things in Myst 4 is that you get to go to the 2 ages inside the red and blue books to see this is where they were trapped all these years. And you get a little more insight into their characters and stuff, which is kind of cool. But yeah, I mean, the story is told through, again, mostly journal entries, and then these, occasional things you find in the environment that suggest their state of mind. And I love that the fireplace puzzle at the end, because I mean, we can talk about the true solution now, which of course is that you everything. So if you actually go and you get the book, or you get the red page or the blue page, you give it to Cirrus or Akinar, and I hope you saved your game, because if you give Akinar the blue page, guess what? You end up trapped in the book, and he escapes to do evil into the world. And you think, all right, well, I fucked up. That can't be it. So I had to give Cirrus the red page, and you do it, and the exact same thing happens. And that's their way of hinting at, like, there must be a door number 3. There must be some other way to end this. And you've got that green book. And even then, there's a bad ending with the green book, because if you click the green book, you go to the Denis age where Atris is trapped. But you need a linking page to be able to get out of it. Otherwise, you're trapped in there with him forever. And he kind of yells at you and tells you you're an idiot for going in without the way out. And so the way out is this white page that you find by working the very first switches you probably touched in the game. There is this box on the dock, and if you flip the switch down with the other conditions met, it will open up and reveal this white page that you need. And so if you look at a speed run of Myst, you can beat it in like less than 5 minutes, assuming you actually knew the solution to, how to get that page out of the box, and what code to put into the fireplace to enter to find the green book. It's incredible. It's like the entire game is this giant circuitous route to get back to the beginning to find out what you actually need to know. It's beautifully impressive that way.
I love games that do stuff like this, where if you know the solution, you can beat the game in like 2 seconds. Like you don't really need much more. You can I think in order to beat this game, you would have to know how to get over to the clock tower. That's really the only puzzle that you absolutely have to solve in order, because I think there's a marker switch over on that clock tower. But other than that, you can just click. You can flip all the switches, grab the page, input the correct code into the fireplace, and go down without ever talking to Cirrus, without ever talking to Akinar. And it's funny, we talked before about world building and how this game does a lot of its world building and storytelling through environmental storytelling, and it's kind of this type of storytelling is the predecessor to what a lot of games have done now. A lot of people, like the Dark Souls series for that type of thing. Know what this game also really reminds me of? Outer Wilds. Have you played Outer Wilds?
I haven't, but I know that it is heavily inspired by this. I mean, I know what the game is generally about, and it's a similar thing, right? It's about archaeology. It's about, learning more about this world by exploring it, and that giving you the tools you need to succeed. And is it also one of these games where, like, you could beat it in 2 minutes if you knew what to do?
Yep. It takes about I won't spoil. You can beat it in under 20 for damn sure. Like Myst, you could beat faster than Outer Wilds, but that's a different story. But yeah, if you know what you're doing, you can beat the game crazy fast in Outer Wilds, and Myst is the same way. And I kind of love that. I want to touch on some stuff real quick. Or actually, sorry, to wrap up the story, then I want to touch on some other quick fun facts before we wrap up the episode. The way the story ends is that if you get the good ending and you grab the page, like you said, once you bring Atris that page, then it sets up the events of the course of events for Riven, because he hints he has another job for you, but you can feel free to explore the island at your leisure now that you've escaped. You've done the best possible ending. But it's funny, if you go back to the island, where the red and blue books were for Cirrus and Akinar, there's just burn marks. They're not there anymore, and there's just burn marks where they once were, kind of leading to the idea that maybe he burnt them up, and he killed his sons. Which I believe is not necessarily canon, because I have not played past Riven, but I do know that his sons appear again in
Yes,
other Myst games, right?
they are canonically alive. They both appear in Myst 4.
That's what I thought. So yeah, I'm sure that's some type of retcon, but I don't. I'll explore that when I eventually get around to Myst 4. But I just wanted to bring up some other quick fun facts, like, that I couldn't fit in the episode when we were talking about, but I think there's some really interesting things here to talk about. So one thing I wanted to bring up is just how they got to Myst specifically. Their first game was a game called The Manhole, and this is actually the game that Sunsoft, when they approached Cyan about developing a game for them, or helping them fund a game, it was The Manhole that got them that funding. Sunsoft loved The Manhole, and The Manhole did a lot of stuff for the development of Myst, where it helped with the nonlinear gameplay idea. Because what happened was, when they started making it, Robin was drawing the manhole. You see a manhole, it opens up, and there's a giant vine that comes out of the manhole, and there's a fire hydrant kind of chilling off in the background. It's got a very surreal look to it, because it's all just black and white, which I think kind of actually lends to the mysteriousness of the aesthetic of it. I've never played the manhole, but it just, from what I've seen with it. And once he did that, though, he goes, I don't know what to do now. Do I go up the beanstalk? Do I go up the beanstalk? Do I go down the manhole? Do I go past it and around it to the fire hydrant? And so it led to them thinking about games in a nonlinear fashion of, like, well, what if a player could do all of that? What if they could go down the manhole? What if they could go up the beanstalk that came out of the manhole, type of thing? And I thought that was a really cool. I like that. Even just seeing that, it kind of captured my imagination and makes me want to play it. Now, the early games didn't necessarily have nearly as much story as Myst. It was a lot more kid-based, a lot more just kind of nonsensical puzzles, but still, you can see the influence of it. And I referenced before how there was a game they wanted to make called The Grey Summons that Activision said, no, stick to kids games. Well, The Grey Summons, when they pitched it to Activision, they said they wanted it to be a non-linear game geared towards adults, where the player is the protagonist with believable characters, ethical and moral choices and consequences, and an emotional provocation. Sound familiar?
Mm-hmm.
Even though the Grey Summons did not get made, all those things are in Myst. So it's very clear they had some idea for Myst. Obviously not the full fleshed out idea at the time, but that was even thought about before Myst even kind of came into being. Some other quick technical limitations I thought were interesting. Game images were 8-bit images, which meant they had a max of 256 colors. And like I said, it took 2 and 14 hours to render all of this, which is just crazy to think about. In terms of music, Broderbund actually was their publisher for for Mac and PC. They're the ones that suggested adding music to the world, and Rand and Robin didn't like that. They liked diegetic music. They liked things that kind of fit into the world as a whole, and that felt more realistic. And so they basically begrudgingly did it, and were like, fine, we're going to prove to you this is a bad idea. And then when they started adding in this music and sound effects, they're like, actually, this is really freaking good. I guess we'll include this in there. So music was added to it. And something I think we should have brought up when we were discussing the story. All the characters are played by the developers. Rand Miller plays Atris. I believe, doesn't he play Akinar too? Maybe.
No, I don't think he plays Akinar, but I mean, he continued to play Atris for the rest of the series. So
apparently he hated it. he
does fine.
He does not enjoy acting. I thought he does well enough. I actually think for a 1993 game with no professional actors, yeah, the brothers ham it up a little bit. It's not bad. It's really not bad.
Again, see The Seventh Guest, where it is the hammiest thing you've ever seen in your life. Like, I mean, no secret that, FMV did not necessarily produce Oscar-worthy stuff, and voice acting in games has come a long way since 1993. But this is at the beginning. The fact that you had any actors at all was a marvel back then. Just the idea of having a FMV. Everything before that was pixels and text. So this was a huge deal. And I think it's good that they did it. Again, having actual human beings as part of the story lends this thing so much more verisimilitude than if it was, if they were cartoons. Like I've seen, like there's those, one of the things that was a bummer in that they've done these very pretty versions of Myst where, it's a fully 3D environment that you can move around in, free walk around, as opposed to say the prescribed paths of the original. Or there's like a VR version, but to do that, they had to ditch the actors in favor of CG animated characters. And like, that's the one thing where it's like, nope. You should have found a way to work back in the footage, because it makes Myst feel artificial in a way that it somehow didn't, despite all of the technical limitations.
I hate to admit it, but I agree with you on this. I think the FMV stuff actually is a really well thought out portion, like part of this game. I think it works really well, and it's good. I don't know. I normally would hate cheesy FMV acting, but I think we've talked about it before, how good this game just like innovate or like immerses you, and kind of everything works together for the greater purpose of the world and world building and story. And I really think the way they incorporated the FMV stuff felt natural and authentic to the world they created, and it didn't feel out of place. Like, it's so easy for that cheesy acting to feel out of place, but I think they created a world that it just made it just mysterious enough that you're able to suspend your disbelief with it. And I think it's fantastic.
I think that's the best thing games can do, right? A game that is at its best is immersing you in feeling that you are part of its world and that you affect the world. And here, where you're exploring it in first person, and it's really, again, just you and probably a notepad. This thing is just so revolutionary. It is truly one of the landmark games of all time. And you can draw so many lines from future games where things you love in those games, you're like, oh, this comes right back to Myst, because Myst was the first game that had the technical, just the horsepower to be able to do this stuff. And so, like it really is almost that feeling of like, the first talkie, or the moment when the Wizard of Oz goes from black and white to color, right? It's that feeling of like, holy shit, we look what we can do with these games. And I think that feeling of immersion, it's almost like that's the high I'm usually chasing when I play most games. I want to feel like I'm a part of this world. I'm affecting what happens in it. And I'm not thinking about the fact that I'm holding a controller or a mouse in my hand anymore. I just am, one with this thing. And I think, Myst is, you have Myst to thank for that emotion in any game that I think is, worth a damn.
Absolutely agreed. And I think this is a good segue into just kind of our final wrap-up thoughts. I know we already kind of talked about it a little bit, but I guess just what the game has meant to us, how, like, overall opinions on it. And I'll give you the final say on this, Doug, since you're the guest. I want you to be able to send our listeners off with it. But for me, I think what this game, regardless of the problems with some of the puzzles we talked about or anything of that, I think this game really represents to me like just something like a prime example of what the video game medium can do, in the sense that while the puzzles are a little obtuse and maybe the graphics don't necessarily haven't aged as well as you remember them, I feel like this game is an entire, like, it's an experience. And that phrase is used too often. I feel like people are like, oh, this game is an experience, that you have to experience this. But I really think with Myst, I mentioned at the beginning, it's an entire vibe. The eerie sensation of this deserted island, of you wandering around, being somewhere you feel like you shouldn't, the music, the incredibly creative visuals. Like, you see it a lot more in Riven too, but like the art direction for this game, and I'm not talking about just graphical fidelity, I just mean the actual art direction of like how they chose to design everything is beautiful. It's such there's so much imagination, and like it sparks so much curiosity in the player. And I referenced before, like Sonic games too, I feel like are good at this. Everything about this and reminds me of Sonic in a sense. Just it feels like the graphics, the sounds, and the music all lend itself to the core gameplay. And then, well, I mean, Sonic's a 2D platform, but in this, all the world building really just it it's a game. It lends so much more to the entire experience. And I'm trying to really put this into words. I think this is one of those games where I feel like in like 5 years I'll finally have the words to articulate how it makes me feel. But I think I'll end it with what I can articulate. I'll end it with this, where I still feel, no matter how many times I play this game, that there is something else hidden, because the game, even though I pretty much have explored everything you can in this game, the way they designed it makes you feel like there's just one more thing hidden. The mystery that gives Myst its name, I think, is the best thing about it. It still makes it feel like there's something more to explore, no matter how many times you traipse around this island of Myst. So that's how this game makes me feel. And the last thing I'll bring up, and it's a fun fact I wanted to bring up that I think lends itself, like this part of design, I think, is one of the reasons why Myst feels this way. I can't say they didn't say this directly in any of the interviews that I watched or read, but I kind of got this vibe from Rand Miller, where when they designed the game, they've said themselves they're more interested in building worlds than they were building, interactive storybooks or games. And he talks about how it really felt like the puzzles were almost secondary to the world building. They wanted the puzzles to reinforce the world, but they almost he mentioned how like the game would have been too short if they didn't have puzzles. So the vibe I got from it was that puzzles were added just to pad out the game, because otherwise they just wanted you to explore this world that they created, but they needed the puzzles in order to kind of turn it into something more than just something you could beat in like 5 minutes. I thought that was interesting. Like I don't think that was necessarily their intention, like that puzzles were an afterthought. I don't think that at all. But it kind of makes it seem like their focus was so much on the world that the puzzles almost felt like, oh, I guess we have to add this in to make it a game. I don't know. He once again, he didn't say this directly in any of the interviews, but the vibe I got, that it felt like they were focused more on the world and not the puzzles. And I kind of think that's what makes this game so interesting compared to other games, to its contemporaries. But that's all I got for mine, Doug. I'm sorry for talking so long, but Doug, I want to throw it over to you. Your final thoughts, what this game has meant to you and all that good stuff.
This game is ultimately about exploration, and exploration is about possibilities. And what I love about this game, both having now the hindsight of 30 years of this game to see its influence and the ripples it's had, is understanding that what the Millers understood at their core is, again, that fun experience of just what you're talking about. Like, there's what's just around this corner, right? What even if I've explored all of Myst Island and all of the sub ages, it feels like there just might be one more clue buried somewhere. And it all goes to what this game fundamentally is, which is this victory of tone and experience, which is why people keep saying it's an experience. You don't get this by looking at screenshots. It's not just that this game is immersive. You don't like immerse yourself in this game. You submerge yourself in this game. You feel like you are just, inside this world, walking through it. And there's so much to enjoy, both on the aesthetic level, the intellectual level, but it all comes together in this way where, again, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. To just feel like this is Myst Island and these worlds. This is a real place. It's not a game, right? This is an actual place with a history, and I have free reign to explore it at my leisure. and learn about sort of the terrible things that rendered it an empty place. There was nothing like this at the time, and I can just say, again, from being 13 when it came out, like there really was nothing like this. And so much of what made games great after this owes a debt to this game. So if you're a younger gamer and you're like, it feels like, you're recommending, Casablanca or Citizen Kane to a younger person. Like, oh, you got to go, if you're a film buff, you got to go see The Treasure of the Sierra Madre or whatever. And someone goes like, yeah, whatever. And then you finally see the movie and you're like, oh shit, this is pretty good. You owe it to yourself to play this game. It's, it costs you virtually nothing to get your hands on it now. You can play it on your phone, although that's not an ideal way to play it. You can get it for a few bucks on Steam or whatever. It's very cheap and easy to find. It is special. It holds up in a way that, few games do over time. This when we say like this is a landmark game, this is up there in terms of like in film equivalents of, The Godfather or Star Wars, or like something that absolutely changed the medium and the way people approach these games. And all of that is there on screen. Like you can still feel that 30 years later. And the proof is like all of the Myst clones, people trying to replicate this, even the Millers, even Riven, which I think is in some ways a better game. This is the more holistically complete thing. It's very, very special. And, I think you owe it to yourself to try it and to do what you can to make your way through its puzzles. And yeah, you use the guide on the bathysphere. But other than that, you are in for a really special treat. I think, even if you didn't live through it, you can put your mind back into 1993 and feel what it's like to walk through Myst Island, with fresh eyes for the first time.
Dude, I couldn't yeah. I wish I could have said it so eloquently. This game's great. I really enjoyed getting to finally beat it for the first time earlier this year, and I don't think I can say enough nice things about it. It's funny because I remember hearing other podcasts talk about how poorly it's aged, and I really don't think it has aged all that poorly. Like maybe I don't know. Maybe if you're talking about just in pure mechanics of some of the pixel hunting, because there are some spots where, like, in order to solve a puzzle, you have to, like, I'm specifically thinking of how to get to the selenitic gauge with the one breaker. Like, there's like two different like switches you have to hit on the electric line, and the one's kind of hidden around the corner. But other than like a couple hidden spots, like, I don't know, it was never frustrating enough to, other than some of the puzzles we mentioned. I don't know. I think overall, with some issues with some puzzles and maybe just some quick locations of like some to solve some puzzles, like I mentioned with that one switch, this game holds up and it's fantastic. But yeah, I think it's a perfect place to let off, my friend. Doug, thank you so much for joining me, man. This was a really fun conversation about this game, and I'm so happy I could finally have you on the podcast.
Oh, my pleasure. I'd be down to do this anytime. This is great.
Well, where can my listeners find you? Where can the good people find you online? Is there anything you'd like to promote and talk about your podcast, Nostalgium Arcanum?
Sure.
Oh my gosh.
No, you're right to mispronounce it. I I stepped on it by choosing a name for my podcast because you know how the kids love Latin. Yep. More popular than ever.
Those kids.
Yeah. So the name of the podcast is Nostalgium Arcanum. And I'm sure hopefully you'll put a link to it in the notes so people don't have to worry about how to spell it.
Yep.
But we cover all old things pop culture. So not just games, but movies and TV shows and music. Josh has been kind enough to come on our show twice, but once to talk about Muppet Treasure Island and again to talk about the Uncharted franchise. So if you like Josh, those are his 2 episodes. If you like games, we've done a lot. So we've done one on Doom. We did one on the 16-bit Disney games. We've done Final Fantasy VI and Chrono Trigger, Street Fighter 2. There's our Myst episode and a few more, I think, that Simon's Quest, a couple others I might be blanking on. Oh, Mega Man 2. So there all sorts of like stuff, whatever kind of floats your boat. I'm sure we've got some episodes that are up your alley. If you want to find it, of course, it's wherever you find podcasts, but we're on the socials on We're on X and Blue Sky at Nostalgium Pod. And then we're on Threads and Instagram at just Nostalgium Arcanum. Oh, and also on TikTok as Nostalgium Arcanum. But that's just mostly me screwing around and doing impressions. But it's still part of the podcast. So if you like that, go find that there. And that's where you can find our stuff.
And you do a mean Kermit the Frog. Didn't you sing Rainbow Connection or whatever?
Yes. So if you get at the end of the Muppet Treasure Island episode, I put in some audio, which was we had a karaoke party at my house, and I did Rainbow Connection, and I did not just Kermit, but a whole bunch of Muppets. And so you can hear that audio at the end of there if you want to hear that.
God, man, I want to watch another Muppet movie now. Anyway, as usual, for myself, you can follow me on Facebook. I call it Twitter because I refuse to call it the other thing. Twitter, Threads, Blue Sky, Twitch at Still Loading Pod, at Still Loading Podcast on YouTube. You can find me all those different places on the socials. I post pictures of my game collection and random shenanigans like ugly Christmas sweaters. At the time this episode comes out, Christmas will be almost a month ago, but whatever. Anyway, you can, if you want to support the show, you can give it a 5-star rating or review on Apple Podcasts or whichever podcasting app you use, because that helps more people find the show and it makes me feel warm and fuzzy. I like feeling warm and fuzzy. You can also support the show by going over to patreon.com/stillloadingpod. For $1 a month, you'll get all the episodes a few days earlier with better audio quality, as well as access to patron voting rights, which at the time this episode comes out, there's no polls going on, but 2 have just ended somewhat recently. One for my quarterly patron poll, where they chose Zillion for the Sega Master System, which I'm not sure if I'm going to enjoy playing, but we'll find out. And also, I posted a poll. I guess I don't know if I'm announcing it here or whatnot, but actually no, I announced it on social media. In November of this year, it's going to be backlog month, so I'm having my patrons vote on. I put up 16 different games, and they have to, and the top 4 in terms of votes are going to be the 4 games covered in November of this year. I figure that gives me an entire 10 months to play, edit, and record all of those. So that should be a lot of fun. So if you want to help guide the direction of the show, that's all available at the $1 level. At the $4 level, you'll get everything I mentioned prior, plus access to 2 mini bonus episodes every month. And then at the $5 level, you'll get everything I mentioned before, plus access to Still Bonding, my monthly James Bond podcast where me and a bunch of friends bond over 007. At the time this episode comes out, GoldenEye will be the most recent one, and Tomorrow Never Dies will be the next one up in February. So if you like James Bond, that's all at the $5 level, and plus all the other crap I mentioned before. So yeah, patreon.com/stillloadingpod. But that is all the time we have for you on this episode of Still Loading. Thank you all so much for listening. Doug, thank you once again for joining me.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And with all that said, listeners, I will see you all next time.